Welcome back, friends, to Build a Lot Acres. In today's video, we're going to be talking about one of the most innovative tractor companies ever, Gibson. Stay tuned. So in order to tell this incredible tractor tale, we have to go back, way back to 1933, Seattle, Washington, where we're going to find Harry Gibson, who founded the Gibson Manufacturing Company. They mainly dealt with larger machinery, and one of the big things they did was actually speeder cars. So in Seattle at this time, in the Pacific Northwest, logging was a huge industry, and getting these logs from the forests out to the lumber mills where they needed to go was a big challenge. And one of the ways they got men and women to the logging sites was on rail. And the speeder cars, which Gibson made, were basically small maintenance cars that they used. They transported maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 people at a time. And there was a number of different companies that made these little speeder cars like Fairmont. But Gibson's idea was to make larger speeder cars that would allow much more people at a time to access the rails and get to the jobs, be much more efficient. And he had models that ranged anywhere from 10 up to 100 people at a time. So Harry's son Wilbur was actually the one who had the idea to start making tractors, because at this time, this was several years later, starting in about 1938, Wilbur realized that soldiers returning home from the war wanted small machines that were capable, reliable, and affordable to help them maintain their home gardens. Because you have to remember, at this time in the 1930s, it was a much different era than we're in today. A lot of home gardens back then could have easily been a whole acre of land. They used these gardens to sustain their family for the whole year. So if you had a family of 5, 6, 7, 8 people, you needed a lot of food to last the year. And their gardens were quite large in size, but not large enough to need full-size farming equipment. So something like a big garden tractor or a small farm utility tractor was what Gibson came up with. So the very first Gibson tractor would have been the Model A, which was introduced sometime around the year 1938. So this early Model A would have featured a 6 horsepower Wisconsin engine, and Wilbur coupled that with a GM Motors transmission. These machines were somewhat crude, they were overbuilt, simplistic, but he was in a hurry to get these out and try to fill that need for, like I said, all these soldiers returning home wanting tractors. So they kind of rushed out these Model A's, and they were a big hit. So these Model A's would have featured a simplistic lever tiller steering design, and they had height adjustable rear hitches and front blades. So it was during this time in the late 1930s, early 1940s in Seattle that there was a lot of pressure from unions for the Gibson Manufacturing Company to unionize, and they did not want to do this, so they started looking for a place that they could call home and move their manufacturing to. And then in 1946 or thereabouts, they ended up moving their location to Longmont, Colorado. So they didn't have the same pressures to unionize in Longmont like they did in Seattle. They had found the town much more welcoming. So after selling approximately 500 Model A's, Wilbur found himself encouraged and came out with the all-new Model D in 1947. So these Model Ds would feature the same 6 horsepower Wisconsin engine that the Model A's had, although some later Model Ds did have larger Wisconsin engines. They had a 3-speed transmission, they had the same lever tiller steering design, and a new feature was rear adjustable width wheels, so they could go from 33 inches all the way out to 54.25 inches in width, which really came in handy for gardening tasks and planting rows of vegetables. These Model Ds, some of them could also be featured with starter generators and fenders, so you had a lot safer machine than you did on the early Model A's. Available equipment for these Model Ds would feature moldboard plows, row cultivators, discs, snow plows, angled dozer blades, spring-tooth harrows, and sickle bar mowers. The popularity of the D resulted in the SD, which still had the same 6 horsepower Wisconsin engine, but it also had a hood, a grill, and fenders as optional items. Next up would have been the Super D, again with the 6 horsepower Wisconsin, but it also had a hood, grill, and fenders of the SD, as well as a steering wheel and a gearbox. So the last of the Ds would have been the Super D2. This machine boasted a 12 horsepower, 2-cylinder Wisconsin engine and was otherwise similar to the SD models. The next line of the Gibson tractors would have been the E series, which were introduced in 1947. The E line included the tricycle front E, the tricycle front with adjustable rear wheel EW, the wide front EF, and the extra wide EWF. All of the E line would be powered by the 2-cylinder 12 horsepower Wisconsin engine, and they also had rear hydraulic lifts, PTO shafts, and an electrical system as optional equipment. So by this point, Gibson had sold approximately 50 to 60,000 machines worldwide between the A, the D, and the E line, and in 1948 he would come out with a full-size Model H. Models would include the H, HFS, and the HFA. These machines weighed in an impressive 4,000 pounds and featured 4-cylinder Hercules engines. They also had a 3-speed transmission up to an 86-inch wheelbase, and they were rated at 18.5 horsepower at the drawbar. It was also around this time that the Model I came out. These full-size machines would feature a humongous 6-cylinder Hercules engine, and models included the I, IFS, and IFA, with up to a 94-inch wheelbase, 4,000 pound weight, and an impressive rating of 37 horsepower at the drawbar. They had 10 by 38 rear tires, and they were real monsters. Even larger experimental models were considered, which would have been the Model M and Model G. It's rumored that some of these experimental models may have been made and could be found on properties in the area. So Wilbur Gibson would end up selling the line in 1952 to Helene Curtis Industries. Rumor goes that after contracting with the U.S. government to make machines for the military, which would have included airplane tugs, cranes, and forklifts, Gibson was unable to fulfill some of these orders, and therefore lawsuits ensued, and eventually he ended up having to close the company and sell it off due to these lack of being able to fulfill these contracts. So the last of the Gibson machines would have been made right around the year 1958. But as for old Wilbur, he ended up moving to the town of Berthoud, Colorado. His new wife's nephew, Stan Williams, was a well-known innkeeper in the area, and they welcomed Gibson with open arms. And shortly after arriving, he ended up starting the Harvey PowerFlex brand, and they made the Harvey PowerFlex 10 tractors. They only made these tractors for about a year's time, and they made about 60 different tractors before the untimely death of Wilbur Gibson in around March of 1959. So the Harvey PowerFlex brand tractors are quite rare. They're pretty identical as far as make and features of the Gibsons, but because they were only made for that 1 year and such a low amount of them were made, they're highly sought after and collectible tractors here in 2025. So if you go out to the Colorado Hills, you may just be lucky enough to sight a Harvey PowerFlex machine. So that's going to do it for today's video on the innovative and unique line of tractors known as Gibson. Wilbur Gibson, the man, may have left us, but the legacy and innovative ideas his company brought forth to the tractor world will never be forgotten. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider giving us a like and leaving a comment below. Let us know if there's any other brands or models of tractors that you would like to see us talk about in these tractor series. We're going to be doing these tractor series, and they're going to be released every Sunday at 12 p.m. noon Eastern Standard Time. And with all that said, have a good one, friends.